It is a sacred sacrifice for your son's future." The esteemed pastor smiled as he spoke, while his hands ruthlessly drained every penny of a poor mother's blood, sweat, and night shift wages. That power system was perfectly engineered to chew up the vulnerable and force them to say thank you. But they made one fatal mistake. They awakened the cold, calculating fury of a 14-year-old genius. And when that boy set his pen to a blank piece of paper, the most devastating karma for these hypocrites officially began. My name is Deshawn Mercer. I'm an education reporter for the Birmingham Ledger, a small local paper in Alabama that most of this city never bothered to read until the story I'm about to tell you ended up on the front page and nobody could pretend they hadn't seen it. I've been a journalist for 12 years. I've written about school corruption, about misappropriated education funds, about principals who falsified enrollment numbers to keep their budgets intact. I thought I had seen every way the system could grind a child down. I was wrong, because I had never seen a system so precisely engineered that it didn't just destroy children, it made their parents say thank you while it happened. This story started on a Tuesday morning in March, at a small coffee shop on 20th Street North in Birmingham, Alabama. I was drinking coffee, rereading a draft about public school budgets, paying no particular attention to the woman sitting at the table beside me, until I couldn't not pay attention anymore. She was crying into her phone. Not quietly. Not the kind of crying you can manage in public with a few careful blinks and a paper napkin. This was the kind of crying that happens when something has been breaking inside a person for a very long time, and the body finally decides it cannot hold it anymore. The kind of crying that is bigger than embarrassment, bigger than the room, bigger than the 20 other people sitting 3 feet away pretending not to hear. I heard 4 words before she walked out. They took Elijah from me. Not Elijah is gone. Not something happened to Elijah. Took. Like something stolen. Like something removed deliberately by hands she had trusted. I put my pen down. In 12 years of journalism, I had learned one thing that no editor ever taught me. Sometimes the most important story doesn't arrive in a press release or a city council agenda. Sometimes it arrives in 4 words from a woman crying alone in a coffee shop at 8 o'clock in the morning. I didn't know yet that the story I was about to follow would lead me to a 14-year-old boy who could see things that every adult around him had learned to stop seeing. I didn't know that his clear, unfiltered, unafraid way of looking at the world, unclouded by money or fear or ambition, would be the only thing powerful enough to bring down an empire built entirely out of promises. But I put the pen down, and I started paying attention. 3 days later I found Patricia Watkins. She lived in a small house on the west side of Birmingham, not the poorest part of the city, not the wealthiest. The neighborhood of people who work hard and don't have time to complain about it. The exterior paint was fading at the edges, but the front yard was carefully kept. A basketball hoop above the garage, the rim slightly bent, the net fraying at one side. Patricia had been a registered nurse at UAB Hospital for 20 years. Night shift. 8 hours on her feet. Home by 6 in the morning, just in time to make breakfast for Elijah before school started. She had done that year after year without complaint, not because she wasn't exhausted, but because every morning when she watched her son sit down at the kitchen table with a book already open from the night before, she knew she was doing the right thing. "You're the 4th reporter who's come to see me," she said when I sat down across from her. Not hostile, just tired. The first 3 all wrote very nice articles about the program. They quoted me. Then they called Reverend Hawkins, and by the time the piece came out I was described as an overprotective mother who didn't fully understand the opportunities being offered to her son. I set my pen down on the table. "I haven't written anything yet." She looked at me for a long moment, measuring. Then she started to talk. Elijah Watkins was 14 years old, the only black student in the advanced math track at Jefferson Davis Middle School. Not because anyone placed him there, but because he had walked himself to the counselor's office after 2 weeks in the standard track and requested the transfer himself. His teachers used the word gifted when they spoke about him to parents, not in the bureaucratic program enrollment sense, but in the true sense of the word. This is a person who sees things other people miss. He read history books and asked questions that sent his teachers home to look up the answers. He listened to music and heard structural patterns underneath the melody that his peers didn't notice. He had a habit of going very quiet in the middle of conversations, not because he had nothing to say, but because he was processing more than what was being said out loud. Patricia described her son the way mothers describe children they are deeply proud of and slightly in awe of at the same time. The recognition that this person is becoming something larger and faster than you fully prepared for. Elijah doesn't trust easily, she told me. He never has. Since he was small. If you say something that isn't quite right, even slightly, he'll look at you in a way that tells you he knows. She looked out the kitchen window. That made me think that if he was willing to go along with Rise Academy, if he didn't push back, then maybe the program really was as good as they said. That was the most precise part of the trap. They didn't just use promises to deceive Patricia Watkins. They used her son. In September of the previous year, representatives from Rise Academy came to Jefferson Davis Middle School and held a presentation for parents. They had everything, Patricia said, and in her voice was a particular kind of bitterness, not toward Rise but toward herself for having believed. Big projection screens, videos of Black students sitting in the libraries of top universities, wearing white shirts, looking into the camera with the confidence of people who know exactly where they're going. Statistics. 94% of Rise graduates enrolled in four-year colleges. 87% received scholarships. Reverend Cecil Hawkins stood on the stage of the school auditorium, not a church pulpit, a school auditorium, and talked about mission, about the way the public school system was failing Black children, about how the most talented kids were being left behind, not because they weren't capable, but because no one was investing in them the right way. The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when someone finally says out loud what everyone has known for a long time. Then the presentation ended and Reverend Hawkins stepped down from the stage. He didn't walk straight to the door, Patricia said, her voice dropping. He walked along the rows of parents, stopped, spoke to each one individually, and when he came to stand in front of me, she paused. He said, "Sister Patricia, I've been hearing about Elijah. The Lord put that boy's name on my heart before I ever set foot in this building." The kitchen was quiet. "He called my son by name," she said softly. "His full name. Not your boy or your son. Elijah. Like he already knew him. Like something larger than both of us had guided him to exactly this spot." She looked down at her hands. "I signed the paperwork that same night. Didn't read all of it. Didn't call a lawyer. Didn't ask my sister for her opinion. I signed because I believed God had sent that man to me." Reverend Cecil Hawkins, 58 years old, founder and chief executive officer of Rise Academy Foundation, a nonprofit organization properly registered under Section 501(c)(3) of the Federal Tax Code. Also the senior pastor of Greater Zion Missionary Baptist Church, 3,200 members, North Birmingham. It took me many weeks to understand the most precise thing about Hawkins. He was not a villain in the way most people imagine villains. He didn't shout at anyone. He didn't threaten. He didn't have a secret villa funded by stolen money. What he had was an absolutely clear-eyed understanding of how systems work, and a legal apparatus designed to exploit that understanding to its absolute limit. This is how Rise Academy operated. Each year, Rise enrolled approximately 80 students, all Black, all from low to moderate income families, all identified as high potential learners through a selection process that Rise designed itself and evaluated itself. No third party, no independent verification, no way for a family to know that the rigorous selection process actually meant, your child seems smart enough that your family will believe in this program, and your family earns enough to pay the monthly fee. Each family signed an educational investment agreement, not a tuition contract, because Rise was a nonprofit and could not legally collect tuition. Instead, families agreed to contribute a monthly community operational support fee, ranging from $200 to $450, calibrated to each family's income based on information gathered during enrollment. Patricia's fee was $320 per month, a shift and a half of night nursing. In exchange, 3 afternoons of supplemental instruction per week, college counseling, scholarship application support, and most prominently featured in the presentation, the Faith Mentorship Network, a program pairing each student with a personal mentor from Greater Zion Church or one of its partner congregations. On paper, a legitimate, IRS-certified charitable community program. In practice, a machine designed to extract money from families who couldn't afford to say no, because saying no meant rejecting the future they were trying to build for their children. Buried in Section 7.3b of the 11-page Educational Investment Agreement, on page 7 in a paragraph without line breaks, in a font slightly smaller than the rest of the document, was the following clause. Withdrawal from the program after December 1st of the academic year would trigger an educational commitment fee equal to 60% of the total remaining balance for that year. For Patricia Watkins, $1,920. Nobody explained that clause to her the night she signed. If this story is reaching you, if something in what you're hearing is touching something in your own life, I want to ask you right now, where are you watching from? Leave a comment, tell us your city, your country. Because families like Patricia Watkins need to know that what happened to them is being witnessed by people all over the world. This is not just a Birmingham story. This is a story about every community where people with power have learned to use faith and hope as weapons against the people who have the most of both. In October, 2 months into the program, something shifted. The afternoon sessions went from 3 days a week to 2, then to 1. Then Rise sent a notification explaining that students were transitioning to a self-directed learning model, meaning a packet of printed study materials would replace the in-person instruction. Those materials, I later confirmed, were a collection of old SAT practice questions from 2008, the kind anyone could download for free from the College Board website. The $320 fee continued to be deducted on the 1st of every month, on time, without fail, never late. In November, Elijah's mentor, a man named Michael Okafor, an accountant and longtime church member who had been genuinely good to the boy, stopped showing up. No explanation. Patricia called Rise 3 times and was transferred twice before a staff member told her that Michael had completed his volunteer commitment, and Elijah would be matched with a new mentor shortly. No new mentor arrived. December passed. January passed. And in February, on a Tuesday night when Patricia came home from her night shift and found her son sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, the lights off, waiting for her, everything changed. "Sit down, Mom," Elijah said. Not a child's request. His voice was flat and certain in a way Patricia had never heard from him before. The voice of someone who had been sitting in the dark for a long time and had already made every decision before you walked into the room. She turned on the light. On the kitchen table, under the pale yellow fluorescent glow of 6 in the morning, was a single piece of lined notebook paper. 2 columns, written by hand in blue pen, neat as a school assignment. The left column was headed, "What Rise Promised." The right column, "What Rise Actually Did." Patricia sat down and picked it up. The left column was dense, Instruction 3 afternoons per week, weekly mentor meetings, monthly college counseling, grade-appropriate learning materials, scholarship application guidance. The right column grew thinner with each passing month. September was full, October was missing items, November was nearly empty, and December through January read simply, nothing. At the bottom of the page, in slightly lighter handwriting, as though he had hesitated before writing it down, Elijah had added one more line. Total paid September through January, $1,600.
Total actual instructional sessions, 11.
Costs per actual session, $145.45. Average cost of private tutoring in Birmingham, $35. Patricia read that line 3 times. The first time she didn't understand it. The second time she understood it but couldn't believe it. The third time she put the paper down and looked at her son. How long have you been doing this? Since October. He didn't look away. Didn't apologize for anything. I wanted to make sure I wasn't misremembering before I said anything to you. October. She repeated the word. Her voice landed somewhere between crying and not crying, that specific register where a person is fighting their own body to stay upright in front of someone they love. You've known since October and you didn't. I didn't want to be wrong, Elijah said, his voice still level. And I didn't want you making a decision based on how I felt. So I waited until I had enough data. Enough data. 14 years old. Sitting in classrooms that were emptying out week by week, working through materials from 2008, waiting for a mentor who never came back, and instead of crying or complaining, he had opened a notebook and started keeping records. Patricia looked at her son and felt two things at the same time. The way you can only feel two contradictory things simultaneously when you love someone deeply enough. Proud beyond what words can hold and heartbroken beyond what any amount of data could measure. Mom! For the first time in the whole conversation, his voice shifted. Just barely, just enough for her to hear underneath the 14-year-old composure a small boy who was trying very hard not to cry. You work nights to have that money. I know what you do to get $320 a month. I know you come home at 6 in the morning and your feet hurt and you never say anything. I know all of that. He pushed the paper toward her one more time. They took your money and they didn't do anything. And I can't keep sitting in that classroom pretending I don't know. Patricia Watkins looked at her son. 14 years old, thin, eyes red but dry, hands flat on the table like someone controlling every muscle in their body, and did something she hadn't done in front of him in a very long time. She wept. Not because of Rise Academy. Not because of $1,600. But because her son had sat quietly in the dark for 3 months keeping records to protect her from making a decision based on emotion, and no 14-year-old on earth should ever have to grow up that fast. Week 9 of my investigation at 2 in the afternoon, I received an anonymous email from a Gmail address created that same day. One line, meet me Wednesday, 7 a.m. Bread and cup on 5th Avenue. Bring a recorder. Agnes Tillman, 61 years old. Community Relations Coordinator for Rise Academy Foundation, 4 years. Before that, 20 years as an elementary school teacher. Born in Selma, Alabama. The same Selma as the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the same Selma as the voting rights marches, the same Selma whose wounds had never fully healed. She was wearing a purple church jacket when I arrived, and she placed a blue-covered notebook on the table before I could say a single word. For years, she said. Her voice didn't shake. This was not the voice of a frightened woman. It was the voice of someone who had already made the decision and was now executing it, one step at a time. For years I called those families. I told them the program was going through adjustments. I told them a new mentor was coming. I told them the self-directed learning materials were an important part of the RISE methodology. She looked directly at me. I said those things because I was paid to say them. And I said them long enough that I started to convince myself I was actually helping. The blue notebook contained 4 years of handwritten notes. Not official records, personal observations, the habit of a woman who had taught school for 2 decades and wrote everything down because that's how you remember exactly what happened, not what you wished had happened. The page I read over and over that night was a note from a staff meeting in October. Operations Director. Mentor rotation beginning December is planned. Goal is to reduce mentor costs to 0 by Q1, while maintaining retention through December 1st. December 1st. The date Section 7.3b became active. Not a program failure. Not a budget difficulty. A plan. Designed before the families ever signed. Before Michael Okafor ever sat down with Elijah. Before Patricia began cutting household expenses to make room for $320 a month. All of it calculated in advance. What finally made you reach out to me? I asked. Agnes looked down at the notebook for a moment. Because last week I saw Victor Lana's name in Hawkins's priority contact list, she said. Not under legal opposition. She looked up. Under strategic partners. If you're listening to this from America, from South Africa, from the Caribbean, from Asia, from anywhere in the world, I need you to stay with me through this part. Because what I'm about to tell you is the hardest piece of this whole story. Not because it's complicated, but because it's about something that happens quietly, in small steps, until the person it's happening to can no longer recognize themselves.
Victor Lang.
44 years old. Vietnamese-American civil attorney. 15 years practicing law in Birmingham. Small office on 2nd Avenue North. No expensive carpet. No designer furniture.
A filing cabinet.
A desk with too much paper on it. A wall with names written on it in marker, family by family, case by case, mostly black, mostly low income, mostly people trapped inside contracts they had signed without fully understanding. Rise Academy was on that wall. I've been watching Rise for 2 years. He told me the first time we met, pouring black coffee from an old pot. They never make an obvious mistake. Every clause in their agreement can be defended in 5 minutes before any judge in this state. But when you look at 20 contracts side by side, the picture is very different. I asked him whether he thought a case could be won. He looked at his coffee cup. It's not about winning. It's about creating enough pressure that they have to change the way they operate. Or enough evidence that the FBI decides to get involved. I left his office that day feeling like I had found the most important ally in this entire story. A man who understood the law, understood the system, and was standing on the right side of it. I was wrong. But it took me 4 more months to understand how wrong. Through 3 days of quiet investigation, I found the truth beneath Victor Lana's surface. In the previous 3 years, 11 families had come to him seeking to take legal action against Rise Academy. 9 of those 11 cases were settled out of court under confidentiality agreements. Each family received a small sum of money and signed a document stating they would never publicly disclose anything about Rise, its practices, or the settlement itself. No public record. No legal precedent. No evidence entering the court system that future families could point to. The 2 families who refused to sign confidentiality agreements were dropped by Victor after the first round of proceedings, cited as unforeseen conflicts of interest. I found one of those families, a woman named Denise Crawford, living in Bessemer. He told me the case didn't have strong enough grounds to win, she said. But he'd spent 6 weeks reviewing all my documents. 6 full weeks. And suddenly it wasn't strong enough anymore. She paused. All I know is that shortly after, Rise announced a new scholarship initiative called the Land Family Scholarship Fund. 5 awards per year. For students facing hardship at Birmingham public schools. I wrote that name down. Sat with it. Land Family Scholarship Fund. I went back to Victor's office on a Thursday morning without calling ahead. No warning. No appointment. I had learned in 12 years of journalism that when you call ahead, people have time to prepare their answers. When you walk in unannounced, you get 3 seconds, and 3 seconds is the only thing that cannot be rehearsed. Victor was standing beside the filing cabinet when I pushed open the door, a folder in his hand. He looked up. He recognized me. And in those exact 3 seconds, before the professional composure could return, before he could rearrange his face into the expression of a calm and reasonable lawyer, I watched something move through his eyes. Not guilt. Something colder than guilt. The recognition that this moment had arrived. Deshawn, he said, setting the folder down. Controlled. Almost too controlled. Sit down. I didn't sit down. I walked to his desk and placed a single sheet of paper on it. 9 names, 9 settlement dates, and at the bottom in bold, Land Family Scholarship Fund, established by Rise Academy Foundation. Victor looked at the paper. He didn't pick it up. He didn't pretend not to know what it was. Sit down, he said again. Not an invitation this time. The request of a man who wanted control of the geography of the conversation. 9 families, I said. My voice was flat. I had practiced this. 9 families came to you to be protected. You reviewed their files. You learned every weakness they had, every fear, every limitation, every reason they couldn't sustain a long legal fight. Then you used those weaknesses to convince them to sign agreements that would silence them forever. They were compensated, Victor said. Still calm. The calm of a man who had prepared for this. They signed voluntarily. Those were their decisions. They signed because you told them it was the best they could do. It was the best they could do. For the first time, his voice carried weight. Not anger, but the particular conviction of a person who genuinely believes what they are saying. That was more frightening than anger. Do you know what the Alabama legal system looks like for a low-income black woman going up against a nonprofit with 3 layers of legal structure? Do you know how long the case would have taken? 3 years. 4 years. During that time, they'd have no money for utility bills, no money for their children's school supplies, nothing except a lawsuit with odds. So what did you give them? I cut him off. $800.
$1,200.
Enough to go quiet. Not enough to change anything. And in exchange, you gave Hawkins exactly what he needed, 9 stories buried permanently. 9 families who could never warn the next family. 9 walls of protection around the system you claimed you were fighting against. For the first time, Victor Lana's composure cracked. Not much. Not visibly to anyone who wasn't looking for it. But in his eyes, just for a moment, I saw beneath all the rational arguments and logical justifications a man who knew precisely what he had done, and had learned to live with it by never calling it by its real name. Your article, he said, voice dropping, will generate 3 weeks of news. Then Birmingham will move on. And the families you're writing about will have nothing in their hands except a newspaper story and a stack of bills. I looked at him for a long moment. Did you say that to them? I asked. Before they signed? Silence. Not the silence of a man searching for an answer. The silence of a man who understands that any answer he gives is already too late. I picked the paper back up off his desk, folded it, put it in my pocket. Denise Crawford wants you to know that she told me everything, I said. She also wants you to know she's not angry anymore. She just wants you to look at that scholarship fund sign and ask yourself honestly if it was worth what you traded for it. I closed the door quietly on my way out. Behind me, in the small office on 2nd Avenue North, Victor Land stood alone with a folder in his hands and the specific, heavy silence of a man who has just heard the truth about himself spoken out loud for the very first time. Agnes Tillman called me at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, not to ask for advice, to tell me what she had decided. I'm filing the formal complaint tomorrow morning, she said. Her voice didn't tremble, but in the background very faintly I could hear something breaking. Not her, but something she had built around herself over 4 years to get through each workday. I wanted you to know first. Agnes. I sat up straight in bed. Do you understand what they'll do? They'll terminate you immediately. They'll. I know. You'll lose your income. You'll. Deshawn. Her voice cut through mine, not loudly, but with an absolute finality that stopped everything. I taught school for 20 years. I have looked into hundreds of children's eyes. And I know what a child looks like when they have stopped trusting adults. That look doesn't go away. It becomes the way they see the world for the rest of their lives. She paused. Elijah Watkins has that look. And I was inside that building for 4 years while the system was putting it there. I didn't say anything. I can't make him trust again, she continued, her voice quieter now. But I can stand up and say I was there. I saw it. I am not staying silent anymore. That's the only thing I have left that's worth anything. The next morning at 8:15, Agnes Tillman walked into the Alabama Attorney General's office with the blue notebook under her arm and a 27-page notarized witness statement. At 9:03, 48 minutes after she entered the building, her phone rang. Rise Academy's main number. She didn't answer. At 9:17 it rang again. The operations director's number this time. She still didn't answer. At 9:44, while she was sitting in the waiting area, her phone buzzed with an email from Rise's HR address. Subject line: Notice of employment termination. Effective immediately. Reason: organizational restructuring. No severance. No notice period. Return of key card and company property required before 5 o'clock that same day. 4 years. Terminated by email while she was sitting in a government building delivering evidence against them. Agnes read the message, set the phone down, looked at the wall in front of her. Then she opened the blue notebook to the first blank page and wrote down the date, the day she was fired, the day she filed the complaint, the same day, in exactly the same careful handwriting she had used for 4 years. Date at the top. Full details below. Nothing omitted. Because that is how you remember exactly what happened. Not what you wished had happened. When the investigator called her name at 10:20, Agnes Tillman stood up, straightened her jacket, and walked through that door with the posture of a woman who had nothing left to lose and therefore nothing left to fear. I was not there when they arrested Cecil Hawkins, but I had 4 separate sources call me within 15 minutes of it happening, and what they described I have replayed in my mind enough times that I see it as clearly as if I had been standing in the hallway. It was 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. 2 federal agents, not local police, federal agents with Department of Justice credentials, and an arrest warrant, entered Greater Zion Missionary Baptist Church through the front doors. The church was not empty. The choir was in the main hall rehearsing for Sunday service. About 20 people, running through a hymn together with the easy familiarity of people who have been doing this every week for years. When the 2 figures in dark suits walked through the lobby and asked the receptionist, a church member of 20 years, a woman who had regarded Hawkins as a spiritual father figure, for directions to the pastor's office, she looked at them once. She knew immediately. Without being told. Without needing an explanation. She knew the way people know when the thing they have quietly been afraid of for a long time has finally arrived at the door. She pointed the way without saying a word. Upstairs in the wide office with windows overlooking the church courtyard, Cecil Hawkins was seated at his desk with Sunday's sermon draft spread before him. He was, by all accounts, writing about compassion. about the obligation of those with power toward those without it. When the knock came at the door, he said, "Come in." Reflex. The habit of 20 years in that chair. The two agents entered. They read his name. They read the charges. Wire fraud, abuse of nonprofit status, conspiracy to commit fraud affecting programs receiving federal funding. They placed the arrest warrant on his desk. Hawkins didn't stand up immediately. He sat still, looking at the paper, for long enough that no one in the room was certain whether he was reading it or simply staring at it without seeing anything. Then he stood. He looked around the office one time. The framed photographs with the state governor, with the mayor of Birmingham, 12 plaques and commendations from community organizations spanning 20 years of public service. A carved wooden sign on the wall, gold letters on dark wood. God is good all the time. All the time God is good. He looked at all of it. Then he stepped out from behind the desk, said nothing, and extended both hands forward. The handcuffs clicked into place. Downstairs, through the office window, the courtyard was going through an ordinary Friday afternoon. A few people walking past, a woman watering the flower bed along the side of the building, a car pulling into the parking lot. Birmingham was settling into a Friday evening. Nobody knew. Nobody looked up at the second-floor window. When they walked Cecil Hawkins down the stairs and through the corridor, the choir was still rehearsing in the main hall. Amazing Grace. 4-part harmony, the way people sing it when they have been singing together for so many years that the blend is automatic, part muscle memory, part something deeper. When the footsteps passed outside the hall, the singing stopped. 1 second of complete silence. Then someone in the choir began to cry. Not loudly. The quiet, contained crying of someone trying not to but unable to stop. Cecil Hawkins walked out through the front doors of the church into the Friday afternoon light, hands cuffed in front of him, and did not look back once. The federal car closed. Pulled away. In the main hall, the choir stood exactly where they had been standing, sheet music still in their hands, looking at the space where their pastor had just passed through. Nobody sang the rest of Amazing Grace that day. The Birmingham Ledger published the story on June 3rd. The headline read, "The Promise Pipeline. How Rise Academy Built a Legal Machine to Extract Hope from Black Families." I didn't call Hawkins a criminal. I didn't call Victor Lan a traitor. I did something worse to both of them. I described precisely what they had done. The numbers. The dates. The names. 9 confidentiality agreements. 1 scholarship fund. I let the facts speak. I let the readers draw their own conclusions. Within 24 hours, 47,000 shares. More than 200 emails to the Alabama Attorney General's office demanding investigation. 11 additional families contacted me to tell me their stories. Cecil Hawkins appeared before press cameras that same afternoon, standing outside the gates of Greater Zion Missionary Baptist Church, gray suit, looking directly at the lens. "We have served hundreds of families in this community with our whole hearts," he said. "The accusations in this article are a harmful distortion of our sacred mission." He did not deny the numbers. He did not explain the transfers to Righteous Capital Partners, LLC. He just used the word sacred and let it do what it was designed to do. But this time was different. This time there was Agnes's blue notebook. This time there was Michael Okafor's formal testimony. Yes, Michael, the mentor who had first been used and then had driven himself back to that kitchen table every week trying to undo what he had participated in, who had finally met me at a Waffle House at midnight and said, "I know what I did. I know it doesn't erase anything, but I want to tell the truth." This time there were 22 families, not 1. This time there were tax records and LLC filings and a Delaware registration and a Nevada holding company. And this time, the people responding to the press inquiries on Hawkins's behalf were not his lawyers. They were lawyers from the United States Department of Justice. The Alabama Attorney General opened an investigation in July. The IRS reviewed Rice's nonprofit status in August after a coalition of civil rights attorneys filed a formal complaint. The Department of Justice opened a federal investigation into wire fraud and mail fraud in September. The agreements have been sent by post, the payments processed electronically, two of the strongest hooks federal prosecutors had available. In November, 14 months after Patricia Watkins signed the Educational Investment Agreement at a school auditorium on a Tuesday night, the Department of Justice indicted Cecil Hawkins on 3 federal counts: wire fraud, abuse of nonprofit status, and conspiracy to commit fraud affecting federally funded programs. He was released on $500,000 bail. His defense team has filed 4 requests for postponement. The trial is currently scheduled for 14 months from now. Victor Land closed his office on 2nd Avenue North after the Alabama State Bar Association announced a professional conduct review. His website went offline on a Tuesday with no announcement. The conduct review is still ongoing as of this writing, and the 9 confidentiality agreements he helped draft are still standing. 9 families still legally bound to silence. 9 families who cannot testify in the federal investigation without breaching their agreements and facing civil litigation. The people who receive settlement money cannot return it to escape the confidentiality clause. They spent it long ago on utility bills, on groceries, on the ordinary emergencies of living without a financial safety net. That is Victor Lana's legacy in this story. Not what he did. What he made permanently impossible. 9 voices that still cannot speak. I want to sit with that for a moment because I think it matters that we don't move past it too quickly. The most precise damage in this entire case was not caused by the man who built the machine. It was caused by the man who was supposed to dismantle it and instead quietly made it stronger. One sealed document at a time, one silenced family at a time, all of it legal, all of it defensible. None of it ever going to be called what it actually was in any courtroom in Alabama. 14 of the 22 families who had been sent to debt collectors received free legal representation from the Alabama Appleseed Center for Law and Justice. In all 14 cases, the debt collection companies agreed to erase the balances, not because the law required it, but because the reputational cost of pursuing those debts during an active federal investigation was too high. Agnes Tillman received a call from Pleasant Grove Elementary School, the school where she had taught for 20 years before retiring. The principal was one of her former students. He asked if she wanted to come back. She said yes. She started teaching 2nd grade in August. Michael Okafor provided testimony to the federal prosecutors. He was not charged. His role was determined to be that of a witness rather than a co-conspirator. He left Greater Zion Missionary Baptist Church, where he had been a member for 12 years. I haven't heard from him since September. He doesn't respond to my messages. In December, Agnes Tillman was invited to testify as an expert witness before the Alabama Senate Committee reviewing proposed legislation, known as SB 247, the Education Service Provider Transparency Act. She arrived in a navy blue blazer, not a church jacket, and delivered 30 minutes of testimony without once looking down at her notes. At the end of the hearing, a senator asked what had finally compelled her to come forward. She was quiet for a moment. I taught school for 20 years, she said. And the thing I know most certainly about children is that they are learning from us every single day, not from what we tell them, but from what we do when we think no one is watching. Elijah Watkins is learning something from this story. She looked at the panel. The only question is what we want that lesson to be. SB 247 passed 20 days later. Nobody in the chamber called it the Elijah Rule. That wasn't its official name. But in the hallway conversations, in the emails between staffers, in the way people referenced it at education conferences across the state in the months that followed, the name appeared. Quietly. Unofficially. Persistently. A 14-year-old boy with a piece of lined notebook paper had produced a state law. I went to see Elijah one last time in early August, 5 days before he began the Alabama Mathematics, Science, and Technology Initiative, a fully state-funded academic program. No monthly fees, no Section 7.3b, no educational investment agreements. He was sitting on the floor of his bedroom, back against the bed frame, reading The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson, a library copy visibly well read, marked at several pages. I tilted my head to check. A borrowed book, clearly. Uncle Michael told me about this one, he said without me asking. He set the book down, marking his place with a torn scrap of envelope. Before he stopped being in touch, I sat in the chair by the window. Outside, the Alabama afternoon was doing what Alabama summer afternoons do. Light going golden across the rooftops in a way that makes everything look like a memory even while it's still happening. You know about what Michael did, I said. Not a question. Yeah. He didn't look away. No defensiveness. I figured it out around December. I noticed he started turning off his phone every time he sat down with me. People only do that when they're running from something or trying to forget something. But you still let him come. Elijah thought about it for a moment. The real kind of thinking, not searching for the right answer but for the true one. Because I could see him trying, he said finally. Not trying for Rise. Trying for me. Those are two different things, and I think I was old enough to tell them apart. I wrote that down. Word for word. What about Victor Lan? I asked. You know about him? This was the first moment in the entire conversation that Elijah's face shifted. Not much. Just enough to show me that underneath the composure he had been building since he was old enough to understand that the world required it, there was a boy wrestling with something too large for any clean or simple words. I know he was supposed to protect families like mine and instead made sure they stayed quiet, he said slowly. Each word chosen. I think that's the worst kind of betrayal. Not because he was evil. Because he was smart enough to know exactly what he was doing the whole time, and did it anyway. I said nothing. Did he get punished? Elijah asked, looking straight at me. I thought about the closed office, the ongoing bar review, the 9 confidentiality agreements still standing, the 9 families still bound. Not yet, I said. And maybe not enough. I waited for the disappointment. For the small collapse that people usually have when they hear an ugly truth delivered plainly. Elijah nodded. Just nodded. Not crushed. Not furious. Just filing it. Adding one more piece of information to the picture he had understood since October of the previous year would never be complete or clean or fully resolved. I already knew, he said quietly. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly the way it was designed to work. It was just designed to protect the people who already had power. 14 years old. I thought about every adult in this story. Hawkins with his sermon about compassion, Victor with his unbeatable logical arguments, Michael with his 2 late attempts at redemption, Agnes with 4 years of silence and 1 brave morning. All of us, grown, educated, experienced, had needed months to see what this boy had understood in 3 weeks. What are you going to do with all of it? I asked. With everything you've seen. Elijah looked out the window for a moment. The late afternoon light was settling across his face. Keep writing things down, he said. Keep asking questions. No matter what adults say. He picked the book back up. Found his page. Mr. Mercer, he said without looking up. Thank you for not lying to me. I stood. Walked to the door. At the threshold I stopped and looked back one more time. 14 years old, sitting on the floor in the golden Alabama afternoon light. reading the history of his people with the focused attention of someone who understands that the past is not a closed story but a map of what is still happening. There are children that the world will try in many different ways to make small. And there are children that simply will not allow that to happen. Patricia Watkins called me at 6 in the morning on the first day of Elijah's new program. She had just gotten home from her night shift. I could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the specific exhaustion of someone who has been fighting for too long and has not yet reached the place where rest is possible. But underneath it, something else. Something that did not yield. The math teacher from the program had called her the evening before. "Your son asks questions that make me reconsider my own answers," the teacher had said. "That's the best sign I know." Patricia told me this on the phone, and then she was quiet for a moment, and I didn't fill the silence because I understood that some things are too full for words to improve them. Before she hung up, she said one more thing. "Deshaun, I need you to understand something. I don't feel like we won. I feel like I've been fighting in the dark for a year, and someone finally turned a light on. And when the light came on, I could see the dark clearly for the first time. Where it lives, what shape it takes, how big it really is." She paused. "But I can see it now. And that's different than before." I want to close with that because I think it is the truest thing anyone said to me across this entire investigation. There are systems built not to break your bones. They are built to break something more delicate and much harder to heal. The belief that the world can be better if you do the right things. Trust the right people. Sign the right documents. Pray the right way. Give your child the right opportunities. Those systems survive not because they are strong. They survive because they are designed to make everyone who sees them feel completely alone. Elijah Watkins saw Rise Academy for what it was in October. He did not feel alone, not because someone was standing beside him, but because his mother had taught him that the truth does not require a crowd standing behind it to remain the truth. He wrote it down. He waited. He refused to change his story no matter how many adults around him tried to convince him he had misunderstood. The system built to consume families like his produced by a specific and unrepeatable accident of character, the one person it was never designed to account for. A 14-year-old boy who kept records. We all deeply crave the neat, comforting resolution of a cinematic ending. When we watch a tragedy unfold, we want to believe that the exact moment the villain is escorted away in handcuffs, the dark clouds part, the heavens smile, and justice instantly restores balance to a broken universe. We desperately want the guarantee that a grieving mother's tears are powerful enough to wash away decades of systemic corruption and corporate greed. But the real world does not operate on movie scripts. It operates on legal loopholes, exhausting technicalities, and the terrifying, silent, and suffocating power of infinite wealth. It has been exactly 12 grueling months since the night the magnificent Caldwell Estate ballroom shattered under the weight of my daughter's truth. I am not standing in a warm sunlit bakery, happily serving pastries to my neighbors, and Valerie Covington is certainly not wasting away in a dark, concrete federal cell. Today, the sky over Washington, D.C. is an unforgiving, heavy gray. I am standing on the towering, pristine white marble steps of the federal courthouse. The architecture of this building was designed to make ordinary citizens feel incredibly small, to remind them of the crushing weight of the system they are about to challenge. But as the freezing wind whips around me, I do not feel small. And I do not feel the cold. I look behind me down the sprawling plaza. I am not standing here alone. Stretching down the block, standing shoulder to shoulder in absolute silence, are thousands of women. They are Black mothers, Hispanic immigrants, struggling college students, and exhausted grandmothers. They are the invisible, exhausted backbone of the gig economy. They hold signs with pictures of their own children. They are the caterers, the drivers, the cleaners, and the warehouse workers who had been silently trapped in the exact same 1099 independent contractor snare that had taken everything from me. We are not just here for Lily. We have formed the largest class action labor lawsuit in modern history. We are here to tear down the entire invisible framework of modern-day exploitation. I turn around and walk through the heavy bronze doors, stepping into the cavernous, freezing chamber of the federal courtroom. The air in this room is thick, formal, and entirely devoid of human empathy. I take my seat at the heavy oak plaintiff's table. Beside me sits Marcus, his face pale, aged, and exhausted. Hidden beneath his tailored trousers is a blinking electronic monitoring device. He has spent the last year entirely cooperating with federal investigators, trying to decipher a complex digital labyrinth of offshore accounts that were specifically designed by top-tier financial minds to be completely untraceable. He has sacrificed his fortune and his freedom to earn a sliver of redemption. I slowly turn my head to the right, looking across the wide center aisle. There she sits, Valerie Covington. She isn't wearing a bright orange prison jumpsuit. Thanks to an astronomical $20 million bail package and a defense team comprised of the 5 most expensive, ruthless corporate attorneys in the country, she has not spent a single night behind bars. Today, she is wearing a sharp, immaculate charcoal designer suit. Her hair is perfectly styled. The pearl necklace is gone, replaced by an aura of absolute, terrifying confidence. She catches me looking. And right there, in the middle of the federal courtroom, Valerie Covington tilts her head, looks me directly in the eyes, and gives me a slight, chilling smirk. It is the smile of an apex predator who knows she controls the terrain. It is a silent, venomous message that echoes her final words from that night at the gala. The system was built for people like me, not for people like you. For the past year, her legal team has unleashed a brutal, calculated war of attrition. They have filed motion after endless motion. They have argued that the 40% platform fees were fully and legally disclosed in the microscopic fine print that I signed. They have argued that independent contractors legally assume their own financial risks. They even hired crisis public relations firms to paint me as an opportunistic, negligent mother looking for a massive payday to cover up my own failures. Her lead attorney, a towering man famous for dismantling labor laws and destroying class action lawsuits, leans over and whispers something in Valerie's ear. She lets out a soft, muted laugh, completely unbothered by the gravity of the federal charges against her. They are fully prepared to argue that the cardboard notebook of a departed child is nothing but sentimental manipulation, utterly inadmissible as financial evidence in a court of law. I look down at the table in front of me, resting on the polished oak wood, looking impossibly small and incredibly fragile next to the towering stacks of 1,000-page legal binders, is Lily's notebook. The edges of the cereal box are severely frayed. The red sewing thread is barely holding the stiff pages together. Yet, the wobbly crayon letters remain. Can a 7-year-old's innocent, red crayon handwriting truly dismantle a billion-dollar legal fortress? Can the pure, undeniable truth of a grieving mother survive the relentless, cold machinery of aggressive cross-examinations and corporate loopholes? Can justice actually be served when the opponent possesses the financial resources to buy the very scales it is weighed upon? All rise. The bailiff's voice rings out, sharp, booming, and commanding, cutting through the heavy tension in the room. The murmurs of the gallery instantly cease. The rustling of expensive suits fills the air as everyone in the chamber stands. The federal judge, a stern, imposing figure draped in sweeping black robes, ascends the wooden steps to the high bench. He takes his seat, adjusting his glasses. He looks out over the massive courtroom. His eyes sweep past Valerie's multi-million-dollar defense team, past Marcus's bowed head, and finally rest directly on me. Then the judge looks down at his desk. He looks at the massive, overwhelming stack of legal defense briefs, attempting to justify the extortion. And then he looks at the tiny, worn-out cardboard notebook resting in the center of the evidence file, the ultimate testament of a child who hoped heaven had warm blankets. The entire room holds its breath. The silence is deafening, heavy with the weight of history. The future of thousands of invisible, struggling workers hangs entirely in the balance of this precise, agonizing moment. The judge slowly reaches out. His hand closes firmly around the handle of his heavy wooden gavel. He lifts it high into the cold courtroom air. But I cannot tell you if it falls on the side of righteous justice, or if the sound of the wood striking the block will shatter the last remaining piece of my broken heart. Because the undeniable truth is, this story does not end today. The battle between the fragile truth of the vulnerable and the impenetrable, glittering armor of the elite is a relentless war. It is a war being fought every single day, in every single city across this country. I place my trembling hand gently over Lily's notebook, close my eyes, and wait for the sound of the gavel to echo in the dark. The gavel is suspended in the air. The final verdict has not yet been written. Do you believe the corporate lawyers will use the law to protect Valerie's empire? Or will Lily's cardboard notebook prevail against all odds? What would your verdict be? Leave your judgment in the comments below. Disclaimer: this video is an AI-generated work of fiction created for educational and entertainment purposes. It explores complex themes of social justice, corporate ethics, and the realities of the gig economy. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, organizations, or companies is purely coincidental. The situations depicted are dramatized for storytelling purposes.